Welcome back. Let's create our own memory leak. How can we do this? Well, the easiest way to do it is to just create an array, and we'll say that it's an empty array to start off. But within here, we're going to create a loop. Let's say I equals to 5. And I want you to keep looping as long as I is greater than 1. And I'm going to say I++. That means let's increment I by 1. Now, you see here that I'm creating an infinite loop because, well, I is always going to be bigger than 1. So all I have to do here is say array.push. And we're going to add to the array I minus 1. Now, when I run this code, what's going to happen is we're going to run an infinite loop that keeps pushing to the array I minus 1 over and over and over until, well, we fill up our memory and there's nothing left for us to use and, well, we're going to crash the browser. Let's see how this happens. Once I press enter. All right, things are happening. Oh, did you see that? Something went wrong while displaying this web page. We just crashed our browser. Go ahead and play with that if you want, or try to create your own memory leaks. But what I did was I filled up our memory heap with more and more and more data. The garbage collection wasn't really working because, well, we had this array. We were using this array over and over until we crashed our program. So memory leaks are pieces of memory that the application have used in the past but is not needed any longer, but has not yet been returned back to us, to the pool of free memory. Now, this was a silly example and most likely you're not going to do in your programs, but there are 3 common memory leaks that happen that I want to show you so you can avoid them in your application. The very first one, and this is something that you've heard over and over, and that is global variables. One of the reasons that we don't want to have too many global variables, such as doing variable a equals to 1, well, I've just added variable a as a variable on our global scope, something we'll get into a little bit later. But if hypothetically I just keep adding variables to my environment, well, we're adding more and more pieces of memory. And if these were objects and deeply nested objects, you can see the memory being used up more and more and more. Another one is event listeners. So if I have something like element equals document dot get element by ID in our browser, and let's say I select the button, and with this button I'm going to add an event listener that's going to listen on the click event, and it's going to do some function that, well, I'll just call it on click. We don't really have it here, but it's going to have that. Now, this is one of the most common ways to leak memory, and that is you add these event listeners and you never remove them when you don't need them. So that you keep adding event listeners, and because they're just there in the background, you forget about them, and next thing you know, you create a memory leak. This happens a lot, especially if you go back and forth between single page applications, where you're not removing the event listeners off the page, and as the user goes back and forth, the memory keeps increasing more and more as more event listeners are added. Another common one is simply using something like set interval, where you have the set interval function that does something, and inside of here, you start referencing objects. And these objects in here are going to, well, never be collected by the garbage collector because this set interval, unless we clear it and stop it, is going to keep running and running and running. So memory leaks are something that we have to be careful of. So one example is SoundCloud. You see, SoundCloud, which some of you may know, you can listen to some really interesting artists and music. Well, they had this application that worked on a gaming device, but it was built with JavaScript and web tools so that this SoundCloud application can be run in the background of this game console. What they found out is that they had a memory leak. Because people put SoundCloud in the background, it just kept running for long periods of time. So that this memory leak that they had kept increasing more and more and more because people wouldn't close the application for, well, sometimes hours and hours and hours. And they noticed that they had a memory leak in their program because, unlike most websites or apps, their app runs a really, really long time in the background. So they had to fix that memory leak. I'll leave a link to this article where they explain some of this problem. It's really, really interesting if you want to learn a little bit more about it. Just something to be aware of, that memory is limited. That is, when it comes to call stack and memory heap, those are two places that JavaScript remembers or stores memory. And we have limited use of them. So for us to write efficient code, we have to be conscious to not have Stack Overflow or a memory leak and to manage that memory well. All right, that's enough for now. Take a break, drink some coffee, have some tea, and I'll see you in the next video.